Stop chasing people who ignore you. Every step you take towards someone who has deliberately chosen distance is a step away from your own position. You may call it love, you may call it loyalty, you may even convince yourself that you are simply refusing to give up. But human beings do not judge your intentions, they judge your behavior, and behavior reveals what words try to conceal. The painful truth is that relentless pursuit rarely creates appreciation. More often it destroys the very value you are trying to prove. The more you pursue someone who has already decided not to pursue you, the more control you surrender. You give them your attention, then your time, then your emotional peace. Eventually, you give them the power to determine how you feel about yourself. This is the hidden danger of chasing. At first, you believe you are trying to win someone over. In reality, you may slowly be training them to believe that they can withdraw from you without consequence while you remain available. That changes the balance between you. You begin reacting, they begin deciding. And once one person is constantly reacting to the behavior of another, the balance of power has already shifted. Most people fail to recognize this because they confuse persistence with strength. They believe that if they explain themselves enough, prove themselves enough, or demonstrate enough loyalty, eventually the other person will recognize their worth. But respect does not grow from desperation. It grows from boundaries. There is a profound difference between fighting for something valuable and chasing something that has already rejected you. One is an act of commitment. The other is an act of self-abandonment. Human nature is constantly observing. People notice what you tolerate. They notice what you repeatedly return to. They notice how quickly you respond when they withdraw. They notice whether their silence makes you anxious enough to chase them. And without saying a word, your behavior teaches them what they can expect from you. If someone ignores your message, your first instinct may be to send another, then another. You begin creating explanations. Perhaps they are busy. Perhaps they are angry. Perhaps you said something wrong. Perhaps they secretly care but are afraid to show it. Your mind becomes a courtroom in which you are constantly defending someone who has not even appeared to defend the relationship. Then you send another message, not because you have something important to say, but because you want relief from uncertainty. That is the trap. You think you are pursuing connection, but you are actually pursuing certainty. And the more you depend on another person to give you that certainty, the more influence you hand them over your emotional state. Your peace becomes something they can give or withhold. The disciplined person refuses to live that way. They understand that attention is one of the most valuable forms of currency they possess. Where you place your attention determines what grows in your life. So instead of asking, "How can I make this person notice me?" they ask a more dangerous question. Why am I investing so heavily in someone who has shown so little interest in investing in me? That question breaks the spell. Suddenly, the problem is no longer how to win them. The problem becomes why you were willing to lose yourself trying. This is where self-respect begins. Self-respect is rarely dramatic. It does not need a final speech. It does not require revenge. It does not demand that the other person regret losing you. Sometimes self-respect is simply the decision to stop knocking on a door that has remained closed. You do not need to destroy the door. You do not need to insult the person behind it. You simply stop knocking. Because there is another principle of human behavior worth understanding, people reveal their priorities through patterns, not promises. Anyone can become attentive when they fear losing access to you. Anyone can offer affection when they need something. Anyone can promise that things will change. But consistency is harder to fake. Watch what happens repeatedly. That is where the truth lives. If someone consistently ignores you while expecting you to remain available, their behavior is giving you information. You do not need to argue with that information, you need to use it. Powerful people learn to observe without immediately reacting. They do not waste energy explaining away patterns that have already become obvious. They accept reality before reality forces them to accept it. This does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean becoming cruel. It means becoming difficult to manipulate, because the person who cannot tolerate being ignored will always be controlled by the person willing to ignore them. Think about that carefully. If another person's silence can destroy your entire day, they possess influence over you. If their delayed response can make you question your worth, they possess influence over you. If their attention determines whether you feel valuable, they possess influence over you. And the most dangerous part is that they may never have asked for this power. You gave it to them. The solution is not to force them to give it back. The solution is to stop offering it. This is emotional detachment. People misunderstand detachment. They imagine it as becoming heartless or pretending not to care. True detachment is more disciplined than that. It means you can care without clinging. You can love without begging. You can appreciate someone without making their presence necessary for your identity. You accept a simple reality: you cannot control who chooses you. You cannot control who leaves. You cannot control who understands your value. You can only control what you do with the information their behavior gives you. That is where your power returns. The strongest person in the room is not necessarily the person controlling everyone else. Often it is the person who has mastered the ability to control himself. His impulses do not dictate his actions. His loneliness does not dictate his standards. His fear of rejection does not dictate whom he pursues. He can feel deeply without becoming a slave to what he feels. Some people will test your boundaries. They may withdraw to see whether you chase. They may become distant to measure your reaction. They may give attention and then remove it, creating uncertainty that keeps you emotionally engaged. Whether this is conscious or unconscious is irrelevant. The effect is the same if you allow it to control you. Your responsibility is not to decode every motive. Your responsibility is to observe the pattern. People often become prisoners of their own imagination after being ignored. They replay conversations, they search for mistakes, they construct alternate realities, they think about what they should have said, they imagine what might happen if they send one more message, and slowly their body moves forward while their mind remains trapped in the same room. That is why rejection is not always the greatest danger. Attachment can be worse. Rejection ends something. Obsessive attachment keeps something alive long after it has stopped being mutual. You can be physically separated from someone and still allow them to occupy your mind every waking hour. That is not freedom, that is invisible dependence. The disciplined person eventually understands that closure is not always something another human being gives you. Sometimes closure is a decision. You decide that you have enough information. You decide that repeated indifference is an answer. You decide that you no longer need another explanation before you are permitted to move forward, and that decision changes the direction of your life. Instead of asking why they did not appreciate you, you begin asking why you stopped appreciating yourself. Instead of studying their behavior, you study your own. Where did you compromise? Where did you ignore the warning signs? Where did you mistake occasional attention for genuine investment? Where did you lower your standards simply because you were afraid of losing someone? These questions are far more valuable than another message, because another person failing to recognize your worth does not reduce your worth. A diamond does not become worthless because it is placed in the hands of someone who cannot recognize its value. Likewise, your character does not become smaller because someone failed to appreciate it. Their response reveals their priorities. It does not define your identity. This distinction creates real confidence. Confidence is not believing everyone will choose you. Confidence is knowing you will survive when they do not. It is knowing that rejection can hurt without destroying you. It is understanding that sometimes two people simply do not belong on the same path. The strongest people do not spend their lives forcing closed doors open. They learn to recognize doors. When one closes, they do not spend years staring at it. They turn, they walk, they search for places where their presence is welcomed rather than negotiated. This is not giving up. It is choosing where your energy deserves to go. And energy is one of the few resources you can never recover. Every hour spent obsessing over someone who ignores you is an hour removed from your future. Every day spent waiting for their approval is a day you could have spent building something that belongs entirely to you. Your goals, your discipline, your relationships, your body, your knowledge, your work, your future. The moment you reclaim your attention, you begin reclaiming your life. And something unexpected happens. You become calmer. The emotional noise fades. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop wondering whether they miss you. You stop constructing stories around their silence. Their behavior becomes information instead of a command. That is freedom. You no longer ask people to choose you because you have finally chosen yourself. Remember this. People who genuinely value your presence rarely require you to constantly compete for their attention. Healthy relationships are built through mutual effort, mutual respect, Mutual appreciation. When all the effort comes from one side, the connection eventually becomes a burden disguised as hope. Walking away from that imbalance is not weakness, it is discipline. You are not abandoning someone, you are refusing to abandon yourself. And once you understand that distinction, chasing loses its attraction. You begin to see attention differently. You realize that attention should not be thrown at anyone simply because you desire theirs. Your attention is an investment. Give it where there is reciprocity. Give it where there is growth. Give it where your presence is recognized rather than exploited. Most importantly, learn to become comfortable with silence, because the person who cannot tolerate silence will always be tempted to break it. And sometimes the greatest demonstration of self-respect is not what you say. It is what you finally decide not to say. You do not send the extra message. You do not demand an explanation. You do not beg for clarity from someone whose behavior has already made the situation clear. You simply observe, you accept, and you move. Because once you stop chasing people who ignore you, you discover something far more valuable than their attention: your own power. Hashtag stop chasing people who ignore you. There is a moment when silence becomes more powerful than any explanation you could give. It is the moment you realize that you are no longer communicating with someone who wants to understand you. You are negotiating for attention from someone who has already decided how much of it you deserve. And the more you explain yourself, the weaker your position becomes. Human beings rarely respect what they can obtain without effort. When you repeatedly pursue someone who withdraws, you teach them something without realizing it, that they can distance themselves from you and still retain your attention. You have made their absence more powerful than your presence. This is the hidden cost of chasing. At first you believe you are demonstrating loyalty. You send another message. You explain your intentions. You apologize again. You defend yourself against accusations nobody asked you to answer. But underneath all of this is often a deeper motive: the fear of losing their approval. And fear has a way of revealing itself. You may believe your words are communicating love. The other person may be reading something entirely different: desperation. This is why silence, when used with discipline, can become a form of strength. Not the childish silence of punishment, not the theatrical silence of revenge, the silence of someone who has finally understood that they do not need to convince another person of their worth. When you stop explaining yourself to someone who has stopped listening, you break the pattern they expected. They expected another message, another apology, another attempt to repair what they were not helping you repair. Instead, there is nothing, and suddenly they are left alone with their own behavior. This is important because people reveal themselves when you stop doing the work for them. If they genuinely value you, your silence creates space for them to approach. If they only valued the constant attention you provided, your absence exposes the truth. Either way, you gain information. And information is power. Most people waste enormous amounts of energy trying to correct every misunderstanding. Someone criticizes them, so they defend themselves. Someone questions their character, so they write an explanation. Someone withdraws, so they chase. They believe every accusation requires an answer, and every misunderstanding requires correction. But not every person deserves access to your explanation. This is one of the hardest lessons in self-mastery. You do not need to win every argument. You do not need everyone to understand you. You do not need to correct every false opinion. Your character, demonstrated consistently over time, will often speak more convincingly than any defense you could construct in a moment of emotional pressure. Silence is difficult because it requires control. Anyone can react. Few people can remain still when their ego has been wounded. Someone ignores you and your instinct says, do something. Send a message, ask why, demand an explanation, prove that you care. But the disciplined person pauses. They ask a different question. What is my reaction teaching this person about me? If your immediate response to distance is pursuit, you teach them that distance controls you. If criticism instantly consumes your attention, you teach them that criticism can manipulate you. If the withdrawal of approval destroys your confidence, you reveal where your emotional weakness lies. People do not always consciously calculate these things. They do not need to. Human beings learn through patterns. And patterns create expectations. The moment you become predictable in your desperation, other people can influence you without even trying. The answer is not to become unpredictable for the sake of manipulation. The answer is to become internally governed. Your actions should come from judgment rather than panic. That is the difference between emotional strength and emotional dependence. But there is an important distinction. Silence should never become an excuse for avoiding healthy communication. If someone genuinely cares about you and a misunderstanding occurs, speak, clarify, listen, repair. There is strength in honest communication when both people are invested. But there is weakness in repeatedly explaining yourself to someone who has already demonstrated indifference. One builds trust, the other slowly destroys dignity. Wisdom lies in knowing which situation you are actually facing. And silence has another advantage. It creates space. When you stop chasing, you stop interfering with reality. You allow people's actions to become visible. Those who value you will eventually make an effort. Those who depended only on your constant pursuit may disappear. This may hurt, but clarity is more valuable than false hope. False hope keeps you emotionally invested in a possibility. Clarity allows you to make a decision. Many people fear silence because they believe it means they have lost. They think that if they stop talking, they have surrendered. But consider the alternative. What if winning the conversation requires you to lose your dignity? What if proving your worth requires you to beg someone to acknowledge it? That is not victory. The greatest defeat is not being rejected. The greatest defeat is abandoning yourself while trying to prevent someone else from rejecting you. So walk away from unnecessary explanations, not with anger, not with bitterness, with precision. Protect your peace. Then ask yourself what you will do with the energy you have recovered, because merely stopping the chase is not enough. An empty mind will eventually return to the old obsession. If you remove someone from your attention but replace them with nothing, you have created a vacuum. And the mind hates a vacuum. That is why purpose becomes essential. People often chase others because they have nothing more important demanding their attention. When your life lacks direction, rejection becomes enormous. An unanswered message becomes an event. A person's opinion becomes a verdict. Their absence becomes the center of your emotional world. But give a person a mission and the balance changes. Suddenly, attention has somewhere else to go. Your work matters, your health matters, your knowledge matters, your future matters. You begin to understand that every hour spent obsessing over someone who ignores you is an hour removed from your own development. This is one of the hidden principles of power. Attention is a resource. Waste it carelessly and you weaken yourself. Direct it deliberately and you build yourself. Imagine taking every hour you once spent checking your phone and investing it into a skill. Every evening spent replaying conversations becomes an evening spent learning. Every morning spent wondering whether someone will contact you becomes a morning spent working toward your goals. The transformation will not happen immediately, but months later, the difference becomes undeniable. One person is still waiting for validation. The other has built a life that no longer requires it. That is how rejection can become useful. Not because rejection feels good, it does not, but because it reveals where your attention has been misplaced. It forces you to confront a question you may have avoided. Why did I make another person's attention so important? Once you answer that question honestly, you begin changing. Purpose also changes your relationship with time. When your entire emotional world revolves around one person's response, you demand immediate results. You want the message now, the explanation now, the reassurance now. But meaningful achievement operates differently. Mastery requires patience. Strength requires repetition. Success requires long periods in which nobody applauds you. Purpose trains you to think beyond the emotional moment. Instead of asking, "Why haven't they responded?" you begin asking, "Will this matter 5 years from now?" Most of the time the answer is no, and that answer gives you permission to return to your life. There is another mistake you must learn to avoid. Do not confuse promises with patterns. Words are cheap when someone fears losing access to you. A person can promise change. They can apologize. They can suddenly become attentive. But watch what happens afterward. Do the actions change? Does the effort become consistent? Does respect become visible? Or does the same pattern eventually return? Human nature is revealed over time. Anyone can create a powerful first impression. Consistency is much harder to fake. A single mistake may be meaningless. A repeated pattern is information. If someone repeatedly ignores you, repeatedly cancels plans, repeatedly disappears when you need them, and repeatedly expects your attention while offering little in return, stop studying their excuses. Study the pattern. The pattern is the message. Many people remain trapped because they fall in love with potential. They remember who someone used to be. They remember the promises. They remember the good moments. Then they compare reality to a version of the person that exists mostly in their imagination. And they chase that memory. But you cannot build a relationship with someone's potential. You can only build one with the person standing in front of you. Hope becomes dangerous when it is used to contradict evidence. You tell yourself they will change. You tell yourself they are simply going through a phase. You tell yourself one more conversation will restore everything. Perhaps it will. But if the same behavior continues, hope has stopped being optimism. It has become denial. The wise person does not punish reality for disappointing them. They accept it, then they make decisions. This is where self-respect becomes more powerful than attachment. Self-respect does not demand that everyone love you. It simply refuses to remain where your presence is repeatedly treated as insignificant. You do not need to hate someone to leave them. You do not need revenge. You do not need them to regret losing you. In fact, if your entire motivation becomes making them regret losing you, you are still orbiting around them. You have stopped chasing their attention only to start chasing their regret. That is not freedom. Real freedom is when their reaction becomes irrelevant. You improve because you want to become stronger. You build because you want to create. You learn because you want to master something. You become disciplined because your future deserves discipline. Not because you want someone who ignored you to look back and say, "I made a mistake." That is still external validation. True power begins when the audience disappears. You become valuable to yourself even when nobody is watching, and something strange happens when this transformation occurs. The people who once occupied your thoughts begin to disappear from them, not because they suddenly changed, because you did. Their silence no longer creates panic. Their absence no longer feels like proof that something is wrong with you. Their opinion becomes just another opinion. Their decision becomes just another decision. You begin measuring yourself by something deeper. Your character, your discipline, your standards, your purpose, your ability to keep moving when something you wanted does not work out. This is the kind of confidence that cannot easily be taken away, because it was never borrowed from another person. Most people spend their lives trying to become more desirable to others. They ask, "How can I make them notice me? How can I make them choose me? How can I make them regret losing me?" But these questions keep your attention pointed outward. Ask better questions. How can I become someone I respect? What kind of life would make me proud even if nobody applauded? What can I build that cannot be destroyed by another person's opinion? These questions return power to its rightful owner, you. The strongest people are rarely those desperately trying to impress everyone around them. They are focused, selective, patient. They know the value of their time. They understand that saying no to the wrong people creates room for the right opportunities. They do not sacrifice their identity simply to remain wanted. They are willing to lose approval if keeping it requires them to betray their principles. That is why self-respect must come before acceptance. When you respect yourself first, acceptance becomes a privilege rather than a necessity. You can appreciate someone without needing them. You can love someone without abandoning yourself. You can miss someone without running after them. You can feel pain without allowing pain to make your decisions. That is emotional mastery. And perhaps the most important realization is this: you do not need to become extraordinary so that the people who rejected you will regret their decision. You need to become extraordinary because wasting your potential is the greater tragedy. Build the life, develop the mind, strengthen the body, master your craft, protect your time, choose your relationships carefully, and let your actions become the evidence of who you are. Eventually, the person who once ignored you may notice the change. They may return, they may not. It should no longer matter. because by then you will have discovered something far more valuable than their attention. You will have discovered that your life does not become meaningful when someone chooses you. It becomes meaningful when you choose what deserves your life. So the next time you feel the urge to chase someone who has repeatedly chosen distance, stop. Do not react immediately. Observe. Ask what their behavior is telling you. Then ask what your own behavior is telling you about yourself. If the connection is mutual, communicate. If the effort is mutual, invest. But if you are constantly pursuing, explaining, waiting, and proving while the other person contributes little, recognize the imbalance. You are not being asked to love less. You are being asked to abandon yourself less. Walk away when necessary. Remain silent when explanation has become humiliation. Redirect your attention toward your purpose, and above all, become so grounded in your own value that another person's indifference can no longer determine how you see yourself. The ultimate victory is not making someone regret ignoring you. It is reaching the point where you no longer need them to notice you at all. That is when silence becomes strength. That is when rejection becomes redirection. That is when self-respect becomes permanent. And that is when you finally stop chasing and start living.